sorry to help. I just wanted to know, because every journey starts with a little idea. And it took you 10 years to make it, so of course more ideas came up as time went on. But what first triggered this whole journey? Like,
Sure.
what little...
Sure. Yeah, it was 1996, and for people who've been alive that long, or also for students of immigration, you might remember things about that time period. Obviously, right now, Arizona and SB 1070 have been in the news. In the mid-90s, it was California, which was the state that was very alive in terms of a culture of anti-immigrant politics. And there was a proposition in California called Prop 187. Without getting into the details of it, it was basically to lock children of undocumented immigrants out of public school, out of public hospital, etc. There were vigilantes at that time in California, a group called Light Up the Border, where they'd drive their cars to the border and turn on the headlights. So there was this political climate that was sort of similar to today in terms of this anti-immigrant legislation. I call it the Latino Groundhog's Day. It's like we wake up and the numbers are different, but it's kind of the same politics over and over again. In any case, that was the mid-90s, right? And I was looking at that. But also, I grew up in the U.S. and grew up, as I mentioned, a fan of science fiction and grew up very familiar with the computer. My mom worked at IBM. And so I was also looking at something else in the mid-90s, which was the birth of the internet. I got my first email account in 1995, right? And so these two things were happening at the same time, and for a lot of people, probably totally separate. But for me, they started to kind of echo off of each other. This idea of the internet, the idea of a global village being tied together by this, this information system, a borderless world, of globalization, or the global village, right? And that was one kind of thing that was being celebrated in our culture. And at the same exact time, that time under Clinton, they were starting to build the wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and there was this kind of violent anti-immigrant climate. And so these two things were going on, and I started to scratch my head. I mean, why is it that we're having this idea of a world without borders, where we can communicate and have this global economy, and yet we're building walls and throwing people out and having this vicious anti-immigrant dialogue? And so I started to think about, where is this going? And I came up with this idea, well, maybe where we're going is a world where borders are sealed, but the kind of economy is completely open and connected. And there was this phrase of telecommuting back then, the idea of working from home. And my cousins are still coming from in my case, Peru, to New York to work in landscaping and construction. I said, well, what if they could telecommute and stay in their home, which in this case was Peru, but work here? And so I just came up with this vision of the telecommuting immigrant. And it was just a joke. I was just taking a walk with my friend, and like, maybe this is where we're going, you know. And it was just, we got a laugh out of it. And then I started scratching my head and said, that kind of makes some sense, you know. And so anyway, that's where it started. I didn't know how to make it into a film until I saw this film at the Prelinger Archives. If you guys are interested in history or film and haven't seen it, go home and type into the internet Prelinger, P-R-E-L-I-N-G-E-R, archive. Type that in. It's this extraordinary archive that's now online and totally free. You can download and make movies out of these old movies, but they're films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, educational, industrial films. But there's a film there called Why Braceros, and it was made by the California Growers Council. So that all these farm owners who made this film in the 50s to defend the Bracero program, right? And so it explains why bringing Mexican migrant labor to the U.S. from the point of view of the grower makes economic sense. Very interesting old film. And I saw this film in a museum in New York and said, this is going to be I'll make a film like that that's going to explain the benefits of my solution. And so I made a film called Why Braceros. And it proposed this idea of, this is how we can solve the so-called immigration crisis. We'll solve the immigration crisis by sealing the border, keeping people out, but then beaming in their labor over the internet. So that was a 5-minute film, and it played in festivals and sort of surprised me. I played at the Guggenheim with Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, but it also went on the internet, and people took it seriously. That was one of the weirdest things, was I put it up on the internet, and people thought it was a real commercial for a real company. And I got a phone call from a reporter at this newspaper called La Opinión, which is the largest Spanish language newspaper in the country. It's based in Los Angeles. And this reporter said, I work in the business department here, and we're on a deadline, and I'd like to speak to the CEO of Sacramento. I said, oh, well, you know, I'm on my way to a conference, but I've got a couple minutes. If you know, and so I did an interview as the CEO of that company. Anyways, all of that's online. And long story short, that the idea stuck with me, and I started to say, well, maybe that framework could be the frame for a film. And I started to write it, and it took, like I mentioned, about 10 years from that point to actually premiering the film at Sundance just 2 years ago. But it starts with a joke. So if you have a joke that you think is really funny and you want to, I mean, stick with it. And also, I also believe if you have a good idea, don't just do it in one medium. You know, I did short film, internet, this film, and I still want to explore this idea. Like the thrust of it still is interesting to me. So.
Can you come at the development of the interface, because her interface is fundamentally different when they go to the Cibaceros company. There's that whole puppeteering aspect where the things are coming out. Can you comment about how kind of you developed that idea?
Sure. Well, let's see. There's some parts of this film which I feel like are pretty original, and there's some things that we've seen before in other science fictions. And I think the idea of plugging your body into the digital world is something that we've seen in a lot of science fictions, The Matrix, or Johnny Mnemonic, or Strange Days, or my favorite is Existenz by Cronenberg, but where you see the idea that the way that we will eventually connect to the digital realm is not the keyboard. Obviously, in the past few years, we've seen that shift from the keyboard. Now we have these touch screens. That relationship that we have with the digital world is not static. It's going to keep evolving and keep, in my opinion, probably becoming more intimate. And so the idea that we would connect our bodies is an idea that a lot of other people have explored. But almost always they're sticking things in their heads, right? And in one sense that makes sense, because it's that's where the brain is. So you stick Jack in it. It's always Keanu Reeves' head, and things get stuck in it. I've got information in my head. But one of the things that I'm really conscious of in general and wanted to explore in this film is that most people on the planet are not white-collar workers. They don't work with exclusively with their minds and their words. They work with their bodies. And that they, so in this film, the idea of looking at working-class people who work with their bodies, migrant workers, in this case, and their place in a digital universe. And so when I conceived of the interface, I didn't want it to be directly into the brain. Just metaphorically, I said, let's put it in the extremities of the body, let's put it in the muscles, let's put it in the arms. The word bracero, right, it comes from brazo, so it's literally like armor, arm man, you know? And so the idea of putting the interface in the arms came from a desire to kind of upend a little bit that limited focus in futurism, where you focus on the kind of way in which the mind journey changes or is altered in the future. And I instead wanted to look in the character of Memo at the way a kind of more corporal journey might be experienced. Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in there. I noticed specifically during the scene in which the pilot, or at least the commercial, was shooting at, I don't know, like the actual insurgents or whatever, you used actual audio from a clip of Apache gun mission, made famous through the WikiLeaks. Was there a specific reason you did that, or was it just because it was good audio?
But well, it's interesting. Through the film, there are documentary images sort of throughout. Some of them are images from my own documentaries, and some of them are images that were harvested from the net, some that are in public domain. There are images, most of the sort of aerial surveillance and aerial bombardment images that are in the drone characters thread are real, and were taken from the internet. Again, for filmmakers out there, I learned through a very extensive legal process that those are all, they're public domain. I mean, one way or another, we paid for them. So, when you pay your taxes, you're paying for the bombing. So the images of it, you own. Congratulations. As twisted as it is, it's like, that's, but audio, but what I learned from my lawyer actually was that he said the audio we could not use because it's the voice of the soldiers, belongs to them, is what I was told. So what we did is we actually had actors come in and react the audio, but I just took the script from that clip that you're talking about, and we had actors redo it. So it's actually re-performed, but it's almost identical. Yeah, we even had them copy the tone. I mean, the tone of voice that the soldiers used in the cockpit in that clip is so extraordinary. So in that case, there was really no directing involved. They just said, copy this. But I think from a, I was uncomfortable using the bombing clips in a sense. It's obviously they're real lives somewhere behind all those pixels. But ultimately, you feel like this whole film to me is not fantasy, and I'm hoping it's not doing anything other than trying to give a little bit of life to the people behind those pixels in terms of the storyline of a character whose father is accidentally killed. Probably like a lot of us know, the drones which are being used today in Iraq and Afghanistan and the borderlands of Pakistan, they're being flown over the waters between Haiti and Florida. They're being flown over the U.S.-Mexico border. In the Middle East, they're obviously armed and have been killing lots of people, and frequently, almost constantly, there's accidental casualties. There was the most extraordinary story in the New York Times about them killing a man in the mountains of Afghanistan because he was tall, and assumed that bin Laden is tall. This man's tall, and they shot him from the sky with this flying robot. And the Times reporter went and found out who he was, and he was just a scavenger. He was like a peasant scavenger who was going up in the mountains to scavenge metal left over from the war with the Soviet Union. But these stories are almost so surreal that are happening. Now we're talking about things that happened today, a week ago, a couple of years ago. We're talking about news and history that look more surreal and more horrifying than things that we typically see in science fiction, right? And so in that sense, I felt like it was a cool gesture or a provocative gesture to have a science fiction film where the ideas are supposed to be kind of surreal and ugly and frightening, but that is supported and sort of footnoted by footage that's documentary. Because part of the thrust of the film is that the world we're living in is that absurd. The Terminator already happened, and it's us. Have a nice night.
Yes, I think the film was a very interesting and creative portrayal of the friction within globalization, especially if you think about like flows of technology and flows of labor, and you position that in the U.S.-Mexico border. I want to go back to your comment at the beginning before the film, when you were talking about like the importance and the possibilities of imagining the future, and that had not been done in the context of Latin America, Africa. I guess my question goes, you just explained us how you position yourself on the U.S. You grew up in the U.S., you talk about like your experiences here. So what have been your collaborations to actually imagine the future that you present here, that it's like a binational future, but it seems to be as from the U.S., from the Mexico side. Like you're intending to look from the Mexico side, but you're actually sitting here. So you can talk a little bit about like collaborations in this process.
When I say sitting here, you mean that I'm from the U.S. and things like that?
No, I mean like you grew up in the U.S. and things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did, if you count New York as part of the U.S. So my relationship with Mexico has been long and complicated. My father's from Peru, my mom's Irish-American. They met and did something in New York that produced me. That's still something that seems like science fiction to me. Two humans. making it better. In any case, through my first film was about my dad's life. It was a look at his migration to the U.S. And paralleled that story with the history of the potato. The journey of my papa and the papa. Both are of Andean, Inca and Peruvian origin. And both came here and transformed. In any case, that film ended up with me thinking that my dad lived in a kind of borderland. Even though he was in New York, it looked at him being a Peruvian couch potato, and how he watched 6 hours of Univision a night, but he didn't speak Spanish at home, and how he separated from his family, but was always calling back to Peru, right? And so it was like looking at my dad, even though he was thousands of miles away from Latin America, his mind and some kind of a longing inside him I could see was going home through the television, through the telephone, and so through technology, this was before the internet really, I started to see my dad was almost suspended. He was physically here, but mentally kind of there. And so I got interested in the concept of the borderlands, or sort of third space. And so that abstract engagement took me to the actual border. I went and made a series of documentary short films on the U.S.-Mexico border in the Tijuana region. And I went to Mexico to better my Spanish, and I lived near Mexico City for a year, and started to get to know a lot of Mexican filmmakers and just became kind of immersed in that world. And so that's been my connection. And so making documentaries in Mexico, living there, and then being part of, I almost, some of my friends call me a Peruchano, like partly Peruvian, partly Chicano, because I just have lived in and sort of been supported by and try to support the Latino film scene in the U.S., and so much of it is just, it's not dominated by the Peruvians, you know. It's just, God bless us, and there's a couple of us out there, you know, and we're definitely connected. But it's you know, to talk about the Latino experience in the U.S., just mathematically, it's 65% Mexico. So that, and then also because the U.S. and Mexico are neighboring countries, which I was going to tell you guys, it seemed like it's a very, very combustible dynamic, and a dynamic to me that's almost a metaphor for what's happening on the global stage. You know, the dynamic to me between the U.S. and Mexico is similar to what's happening between, you know, England and its ex-colonies, India and other territories, or France and Algeria, or Israel, Palestine. These types of landscapes that are profoundly connected by history and yet vastly separated by culture, economics, and politics. And so I think around the world there are these kind of twin relationships. But to me, really, globally, U.S.-Mexico is the sort of most incandescent of them because of the border, because we're connected at the hip. For all those reasons, I've become interested in this.
So many questions. There was one I saw way in the back, so we'll take a stab at either one of you. You can fight for it.
Oh. Can we talk a bit about film?
Of course.
What kind of camera?
Okay, I can answer one of those, and it might be the one that you don't think I'm going to answer, but I'll tell you the budget was $2.5 million. I don't know what kind of camera we shot it with. It wasn't anything fancy. It was a long time ago. I've never shot on film. My DP was an incredible woman named Lisa Rinsler, who, if you don't know her work, just look her up. She's made about 30 feature films, including back in the day, Dead Presidents and what else did she do? A lot of them are spacing out right now. But a lot of music videos for the Beastie Boys. But it was a very standard Super 16 camera. So we shot on Super 16. It was a very just standard camera, nothing fancy about it. And the budget was $2.5 million, but I think we got about $1 million of additional services through the Sundance Institute, which was key to nurturing this project. They started to support it through their filmmaker labs in 2001, and along the way supported it with everything from free film to a free color correct, a free output from the digital space to 35, free sound mix at Skywalker Ranch. So it was they made a profound impact in many ways.
You two in the back, you're fighting for it. Go for it.
I just want to know if there seems to have been another analogy or metaphor more of a spiritual being able to be, within each other, be able to connect on a deeper level. So somehow by having the wall and separation, we've also been able to have a deeper connection to each other. I don't know if you intended that or I'm just...
Oh yeah, no, I think when Hugh was mentioning the contradictions of globalization, I think that this film, in terms of what it says or its position on technology, is filled with contradictions. The idea, I think a lot of science fiction looks at technology in a very paranoid way, like it's going to make life markedly worse, one way or another. What I try to present here is something more ambiguous, that the technology does allow for new forms of alienation, right? The worker who builds a building that he literally won't even be able to walk in once, or the soldier who's never going to actually see the people he's fighting, That I think that's true, and I think a lot of us feel that in our daily lives. The ways in which technologies that connect us sort of make us feel a little bit further away. At the same time, there's also ways in which those same technologies of communication, network technologies, are creating new solidarities, new alliances, making old relationships that we thought were left a long time ago, bring them back to life. And so I think there is ways in which, in reality, technology fulfills these contradictory functions, and so that's at the core of the film. And I love the idea of, I'm not sure I'd ever use it in my own life, but the idea of, I like the idea of, cinematically, of doing a scene where lovemaking could be heightened, and you're kind of opening up not just your body, but like some other thing. Body's usually enough for me. Next.
What your Tucson connection is? Did you live here or did you study here?
In this lifetime, there's been no Tucson connection other than that no. I mean, I like being here. I've not yet eaten the Sonoran hot dog. I've been told that's, that will consummate the connection to Tucson.
Yes, Della?
I want to thank you for the work, of course, and there's so much I loved about it, but I found your definition of the American dream particularly compelling, and I wondered if you could just comment further on that.
Wow, well, thank you. Okay, so to me, again, in my own position, I've been making films about immigration for about 15 years, and so watching, like I was mentioning, watching the political landscape in terms of immigration transform over that pretty long time period now. For most of it, my own read was that what was going on in this country is that there's like a kind of discourse that happens publicly in which migrants are called things like illegal, or maybe occasionally called guest workers, or they're called lots of horrible things, but that beneath the hood, like if you open up the engine, economically there was a machine that was bringing millions of people here.